What's up, guys? We had a 1-1 day last night. Slight loss, not the best. Ball State out of the MAC tournament. They did not get there, unfortunately for them. And Cleveland Cavaliers got there, although that game went into overtime. That was a close game for sure. But having Cleveland covered all the numbers too. So even if you got in on it on the worst number and laid the 2.5 or whatever, which I don't know if I would have recommended that. I got the +1 overnight, which felt a lot more comfortable, but they covered all the numbers in the end, even though it went into overtime. They had a really good overtime period. Cleveland Cavaliers, without Mitchell, without Strus, doesn't even matter. They just still beat one of the best teams in the NBA, of course, Minnesota. Not quite the same team without Towns. So moving on to today, we got a big card, obviously. This is the last college basketball Saturday. We'll start with college basketball, I guess, even though it's the most fun out of these. I do have one play in the NBA and in the NHL as well. College basketball, I believe I'm on 6 of these games, and they're all going to be in the bigger conferences. I am not making any plays in these smaller conference tournaments, even though I think there are some interesting matchups in these smaller conference tournaments. Some of these games are going to be fun to watch. Bradley Drake, I think, is a very interesting game. That one looks like it's going to be pretty fun, and that's the semifinals in the Missouri Valley to get into the final, which hopefully is going to be against Indiana State. I want to see Indiana State in the tournament, but I don't know if it's going to happen, but we'll see. Bradley Drake, that's a game with a close line, too, like 1.5 or something. That's going to be good, and I actually think in the SoCon, the Southern Conference, whatever it is, Southern Conference, Western Carolina and Furman, that is an interesting game, because I think Western Carolina's been kind of overrated all year a little bit. If you look at like KenPom's rankings, he hasn't had them quite as good as some of these other teams. And Furman, I think, is a team that had a lot of injuries early on, and they're kind of coalescing now. So I think that one's going to be interesting too. It looks like there might be a lot of sharp action. It looks like Republic action on the Furman side in that one, and they're the team with the much uglier record, but I think they're actually the favorite in that game, even though they're the lower. I think they're the lower seed as well, and I think neither of those teams have played in the tournament yet. I forget how that tournament is structured yet, but won't be on those games. We do have 3 giant games, the 3 biggest games in college basketball. I'm not playing any of them, but I guess I'll comment on them. Kansas-Houston is the 14 versus the 1. That's one of the 3 big ones. Houston laying a big price at home. Houston laying 9.5, I think. Actually, they're up from 7.5 to 8. I thought it was 9.5 at one point. Maybe it was, but it's gone down. It looks like they have 61% of the tickets, but 55% of the cash. So it looks like they're actually public, which is a little bit strange. KenPom, of course, has had Houston kind of up there in the number 1 spot basically all year. He has them as the number 1 defense. They play a ridiculously slow tempo and great defense, and they really just kind of grind you down. I think they are the significantly better team over Kansas. They're actually both better offensively and defensively than Kansas. Kansas is actually a better defensive team as well. Kansas plays a much faster pace than Houston does, so I would think that Houston would probably wind up slowing this game down. You're asking a lot, though, for Houston to cover this large number. My slight lean would still be to Houston, though, because one of Houston's only losses on the season was at Kansas, and this is now their final home game in their first Big 12 season, so I do think this is going to be a pretty big motivated spot for Houston. Both teams are going to be motivated here, but Kansas is also coming off a blowout win over their rival, Kansas State. Even though Kansas State's down this year, that is a pretty big win as well. Houston is coming off looking pretty ugly against UCF on the road at UCF, kind of a weird place to play. They were losing a lot of that game, but they still got out of there with a win. So Houston's kind of coming off an escape, and maybe they were looking ahead to this game, whereas Kansas is just coming off a giant blowout. And I think people might look at this and think, well, Kansas already beat Houston once, even though this is at Houston. It's the number 14 ranked team versus the 1, and think this is going to be competitive and that this line looks big. So even though it does look like Houston's public and the cash discrepancy is against them, my lean in this one would actually be to Houston. But Houston doesn't really play a style of game that's as conducive to covering large numbers. So I don't know. I expect Houston to win, but covering is a little bit sketchy, although I kind of lean that way. Kentucky, Tennessee, you have the 15 against the 4. Tennessee ranked, they're rankings in the top 25, their ranking is about where I think it should be. It looks like Kentucky's public, but the line is also moving their direction, and they have potentially professional action on their side as well. Tennessee down from 9.5 to 7. The line's moved with 86% of the cash, 86% of tickets, 94% of the cash, all on the other side on Kentucky as the road underdog. Kind of interesting there because Kentucky, I mean, I like Tennessee better than I like Kentucky in general. And I don't just mean the fact that I like Tennessee better as human beings, although I just kind of like the Tennessee team better, but just from a basketball perspective, I think I like the defensive team better than the offensive team. Kentucky really has some defensive problems still, even though they've been playing better recently. Kent Bob still has them as the 100th best defense, which is really bad. Both of these teams actually play fairly fast tempos. Kentucky plays really fast, and Tennessee still plays pretty fast, despite also having a really good defensive efficiency number at third on Ken Palm. So all of the things thrown out, I would kind of want to lean to the Tennessee side here, but I'm not sure that that's the way I would actually lean in this game because Tennessee went into Kentucky and beat them. So I'm actually maybe a little bit surprised that the public's not on Tennessee a little bit more than they are, although I think they're going to look at this and think this is going to be a competitive game. But if you see that Tennessee beat Kentucky on the road at Kentucky, you kind of think that they'd probably win at home. And they covered this number on the road at Kentucky too. So you'd probably kind of think, well, that probably means they're going to also be able to do it at home, right? So I actually kind of lean to the Kentucky side here a little bit. Tennessee, and they're coming off a stretch of 3 big games. They beat Auburn at home. That was a huge game. Went on the road, beat Alabama in a game I really didn't expect them to win. Tough game and won that one. And then second straight road game, they beat South Carolina, who kind of gave them a scare, although South Carolina way overrated, continues to be. As I keep mentioning, and this is going to be Tennessee's final home game, so I really don't want to actually fade Tennessee here, but they're coming off some bigger games. Kentucky's just coming off an easy win over Vandy or whatever. So Kentucky is in the better spot as far as like how rested up these teams are going to be. And there's that little road reversal revenge angle there. So my lean would be to Kentucky a little bit. Plus, when you have Tennessee as the better defensive team laying a bunch of points, that's not as great as if you had the better defensive team getting points or having a smaller number there. So even though Houston is also the better defense in their game, and I actually kind of lean to their side, I kind of lean to the Kentucky side in this one. And then, of course, the biggest game, potentially, arguably, the North Carolina game, UNC and Duke. North Carolina ranked 7 in the country. Duke ranked 9th in the country. Of course, probably everybody remembers the first time they played at North Carolina won and covered. They won fairly easily. They were just winning the whole game pretty much. It was almost kind of a domination, but Duke had a lot of turnovers, 11 turnovers in the game. UNC only had 5. I don't think that's going to be the case when you flip the game to the other side here to Duke's arena. Usually the home team does better in the turnover department, so that was the case in that game. I expect it to be the case in this game. Duke shot really badly from three-point range in that game, 26.3%. That was also kind of the difference in the game. But people, I think, might look at this and kind of maybe want to take the UNC side here. It looks like UNC actually, it looks like the tickets are evenly split at 50%, but UNC has 55% of the cash, but the lines moved up from Duke 4 and Duke -4 going through the 5 now. 5 is a little bit much on Duke. These teams, I believe, are power rated pretty close to each other. KenPom has Duke 1 spot ahead of North Carolina. North Carolina is the better defensive team. Duke is the better offensive team. Duke plays a way, way slower tempo, though, so that might throw North Carolina off a little bit. Duke in the slowest 100 teams almost in the country, slowest like 120 teams in the country, but North Carolina ranked all the way up at 43 in tempo, so the 43rd fastest. So that might flip around. You might see a lower scoring game here than you saw at Chapel Hill. This one in Cameron Indoor, which is where Durham, North Carolina, wherever the hell it is. Actually, I forget. Is Durham where, yeah, is that where it is? I think it is. I don't even know anyway. I don't know which towns are which in North Carolina, man, which cities. But yeah, I expect the game to probably be a little bit slower, maybe more to Duke's pacing in this one. I kind of lean to the Duke side in this one. So on all 3 of those, I actually kind of lean where the number is headed rather than where I see like the market percentages right now, because I don't think the market percentages have quite like panned out yet as far as what you'll actually wind up seeing. It's interesting. I lean to the Duke side in that one to actually get a little bit of revenge there. They're the home team. They're not going to lose the turnover battle as badly as they did in the first game, I would have to imagine, and they probably will not shoot as poorly from the 3-point range. And they'll probably be able to slow the tempo down a little bit. Moving to the actual plays I have, we got a bunch, and they're all going to be on home teams. We're playing I believe, all three home favorites that are unranked teams against ranked road opponents. We're going back to the well here, man. The angle that's won most of the year, but kind of trailed off in the last couple of weeks, but we're still going to go to it in these cases. Actually, I think there might only be two of those, actually, depending on where you got the number, and the rest are going to be all under us. We're playing on all home teams today, man, in their home finale. First game up, Kansas State against Iowa State. This line just looks very suspicious, with Iowa State ranked 6th in the country, which I think is Iowa State's very good, and I think they might even be a top 10 team in the country because their defense is so good, but 6th is a little bit much, and they're laying 3.5 on the road at K-State. In K-State's finale, Iowa State's got 74% of the tickets, only 70% of the cash. This line's gone down from 4.5 down to the 3.5. I believe that there are still 4s out there. I believe I was able to grab a 4 on this one. So, I don't know, 3.5, 4, 4.5, somewhere in that range. Iowa State, the public road favorite here, a small favorite, and it almost looks too easy to play Iowa State here. So that can tend to be what gets you in trouble, man. And it's a team that plays better defense than offense. Iowa State, not a great offensive team, so that's also not really what you want when you're laying points on the road. You would prefer to have a team that can score a little bit better than Iowa State can. Kansas State, they're a much better home team, man. So Kansas State, they're coming off a blowout loss as well, too. Yeah, their rival, Kansas, but they lost 2 games on the road. Now they're coming back home. They've been much, much better at home. So they're coming off a blowout. So even though it was to Kansas, their rival, I mean, that's a pretty ugly loss. So they're going to want to turn it around in their final home game, man. It's senior night. They're going to want to play well in this game, or senior day, because this is in the afternoon. They're going to want to play well here. And Iowa State already beat them by double digits in Iowa State. So that game, they might remember that as well. That game was actually kind of a faster tempo game than I think you sometimes see out of Iowa State, although they're not the slowest team, but they're kind of in the middle of the pack tempo-wise, but play a really good defense. Kansas State, they actually play a little bit slower, and Kansas State actually is pretty good defensively. They're not that bad defensively, 23rd in the country. Their offense is just very bad. So Kansas State's kind of similar in a lot of ways to Iowa State. They're just worse at everything than Iowa State is, but I like this spot, man. Iowa State, they're coming off a pretty big win over a ranked BYU team, and that was in their home finale, their conference home finale, and it was revenge because they had lost at BYU. So that's a pretty big win. They were able to beat Big 12 newcomer BYU in their home finale. Big win for Iowa State. Iowa State, they're almost effectively locked into the 2 seed in the Big 12 tournament as well. They cannot drop behind Baylor at this point, I believe. So they're not going to be below the 2 seed. Seeding doesn't even matter that much in these bigger tournaments either. I mean, you're at a neutral site. It matters if you want to like try to swing like the matchup situation in your favor, I guess. But Houston could potentially lose to Kansas, I guess. But I believe Iowa State also doesn't. Do they not have the tiebreaker? I don't think they have. I don't know, because they split the season series, Iowa State and Houston, I believe. Or did they? Yeah, Iowa State was able to beat Houston at Iowa State. Yeah, so I thought Houston was 2-0 against them, but they're actually not. So I don't know. So I don't know if Iowa State would have the tiebreaker. I guess they would not have the tiebreaker, because the tiebreaker, I think after that, would go to overall record. I don't know how the tiebreakers work in each conference, but Iowa State may be locked into the 2 seed here. I don't think it even really matters that much. That was a big win over BYU. Now they're going on the road in a game that I think means a lot more to Kansas State than it will mean to Iowa State. Iowa State, I mean, they're in the tournament. They're one of the highest seeds in the Big 12. They might already be looking ahead to that. They already beat this Kansas State team once. This Kansas State team's not good. Kansas State's lost 5 of their last 7 games, and they've lost 9 of their last 12. Is it 9 of the last 12? Whatever it is. They've lost a lot of games in a row, or a lot of games recently. They've been playing pretty poorly in Big 12 play, but Kansas State is much better at home, to the extent that I believe Kansas State only has 1 game at home where they lost by more than this margin, and that was at home to Oklahoma. They lost by 20. That was kind of a weird game. Coming off of a Houston game where they also kind of got blown out on the road at Houston. Their only home loss by this margin was that game against Oklahoma. Kansas State has actually been a much better home team. So their record is actually a lot better at home. I believe they're above 500 at home, and every one of the losses they've had at home, at least in the Big 12, I think just overall throughout the entire season, Actually, except for maybe no, we'll take it just conference play because they actually lost a couple of out-of-conference games pretty badly at home. But in Big 12 play, it is the case that they've only not covered this number, this 4, once throughout all of Big 12 play. So I do like that. So they play a lot better at home, and they've been tough to beat by margin at home. So I'll be on Kansas State. That's going to be the first play. I don't know. I might wind up splitting these videos up again, even though I hardly have any other plays besides this. Next play is going to be on Villanova. I was able to get plus 5.5, or plus 5.5. No, excuse me, plus 1.5. 5.5 would be crazy. 1.5 on Villanova. They're hosting Creighton. This is a much bigger game for Villanova, man. Creighton's got 71% of the tickets, but 58% of the cash. This is one of the ones that almost fits the unranked home favorite criteria, but Creighton's just a slight road favorite. Creighton's the public team. Of course, they're ranked 10th in the country or whatever. Villanova unranked. Everybody likes Creighton better. Creighton plays a much less ugly style than Villanova does. Villanova, one of the slowest paced teams in the country, plays a lot of low-scoring, hideous-looking games, and their record is a lot uglier than Creighton's is. So the public is going to want nothing to do with Villanova here, but I, of course, do. This is a much bigger game for Villanova, and they're getting points at home in their senior day, their home closer here in the Big East. So this is a huge game for Villanova, man. Creighton, yeah, like I said, they're the public road team, but they have a lot less of the cash than the ticket percentage on them. So that's another market indicator there, where the market is indicating on the Villanova side with the cash discrepancy on the side of Villanova, but Creighton being pretty heavily public. Creighton is coming off a pretty big win over number 5 ranked Marquette in their home finale. That was a much bigger game. That was a huge win. In 2 of their last 3 home games, all 3 of their last home games are actually really big. They beat UConn in a blowout. They won that game against Marquette in their most recent game, like I said, by double digits. Big win, high-scoring game, a nice-looking win there. And in between those, they got no, it wasn't revenge. They beat Seton Hall to sweep Seton Hall in the season series. I thought they had lost at Seton Hall in that weird triple overtime game, but they'd actually gotten out of there with a win too. But still, another win over Seton Hall was good. Now they go to Villanova, which, yes, the one thing about this is that Villanova actually beat Creighton already at Creighton by 2 points, and Villanova was able to really slow Creighton down in that game and play a Villanova-style game in the 60s. But that kind of leads me to believe that if Villanova can control the pace on the road at Creighton, not an easy place to go for these Big East teams having to go out to Omaha, that they should be able to do this at home. Villanova has been a much better team at home as well. So Creighton, they're coming off like their big win, like one of their biggest win was over UConn, obviously, but their like second biggest win over Marquette. Huge win there, even though Marquette's been without Kolek. Still a huge win for Creighton to finish their home season off right there. That was their final actual home game. Their huge win. Now they have to go out on the road, coming east for an Omaha team. That's not an easy thing to do, either having to go to Philadelphia to face Villanova. And Villanova's off the game that I was on, Seton Hall. I thought it was a much better spot for Seton Hall. I thought Villanova might be looking ahead to this game, and Villanova had trashed Seton Hall at Villanova by almost 30 points earlier in the season. Villanova, yet again, the much better home team. So they're coming off an ugly loss. That was a bad spot for them. Revenge for Seton Hall. Second straight road game. Seton Hall, Villanova both battling to even get into the tournament. Seton Hall with that win, they're now like almost definitely in the tournament. Villanova, they're on the bubble for sure, man. They're in all the bracketology bubbles right now. A lot of the bracketologists have them out. I actually have them slightly in right now, but they're battling to get into the tournament, man. So this is not only their home finale, and it's against one of the top 10 teams in the country. It is a huge game as far as that is concerned. If they were able to sweep the season series against Creighton, I don't know if the committee would be able to leave them out of the tournament. Like, this could almost secure a tournament berth for them if they're able to win. And this is certainly a winnable game, as they're only a 1.5 point underdog here. And as far as like the KenPom rankings, or KenPom doesn't even have this number that far. I think he has this as like a 1 point number. The Kansas State one, by the way, he does have as like a 6 point game. So that's, I don't know. We're bucking the power ratings a little bit, taking 4 with Kansas State, but I still like that one as well, obviously. Villanova, I like this one as well. Yeah, big time. Getting the 1.5. So we're on Villanova. Villanova, like I said, they've been a much better team at home. You look at their home games in conference, much better. Beat Xavier, crushed DePaul. They came to within 1 point against UConn, lost by 5 to Marquette, beat Providence pretty handily, destroyed Seton Hall, beat Butler by double digits, beat Georgetown by almost 30 points, and now Creighton. So what did I just say there? So they've only lost 2 games at home, and it was to the top 2 teams in the conference, UConn and Marquette, and it was by a combined 6 points in those 2 games. Oh, and they lost to St. John's at home, by 10 as well. So they've lost 3 home games, I guess. But even so, they've played much, much better at home. And those top 2 teams in the Big East, they played really tough at home. Villanova plays a much, much slower style, which is what I was about to say a little while ago. They're 348th according to KenPom in tempo. So one of the slowest, 12 teams in the country. They're 13th in defensive efficiency. KenPom actually has them the 29th ranked team in the country. So much better than their record would suggest. They're definitely ugly offensively for sure, but very good defensively. They slow the tempo down big time. Creighton does also play a pretty slow tempo, but Villanova plays an even slower tempo, which is really, really crazy. And Creighton, yeah, they're much better offensively, but Villanova is actually the better defensive team according to KenPom's defensive efficiency rankings. I just think this game means way more to Villanova. So I think we're going to see a Villanova team really come out and want to win this game. Villanova will be the play on that one, plus 1.5. Next one up is going to be the one of the 2 home favorites. It's unranked against a road ranked underdog, and that's going to be on Mississippi State, another team that's been much better at home than on the road. Most of these teams, home court is really big in college basketball, man. Mississippi State, unfortunately, they opened a 3. I don't know where they actually opened 3. According to KenPom, at least they're up through the 5 now, to 5 with juice. I don't know if you can still find lower numbers than that. Maybe you still can. I was able to find a 4.5. The best you might be able to get is 5. There's not that much of a difference between 4.5 and 5, although I don't love it at 5. I think KenPom might have this at around 4. Mississippi State's a bit of an underrated team, man. He's got them 18th in defense in the nation, which is pretty good. Another good defensive team, and they've been pretty good at home, which I'll discuss in a minute. They are hosting, who the hell are they even playing against? They're hosting South Carolina, of course. South Carolina's, of course, I keep saying how overrated they are. They're ranked 17th in the country right now, whatever. So KenPom has them down at the 47th best team in the country. He has them as a much slower team than almost any team in the country, 354th, an extremely slow tempo team. But he has them not very good either offensively or defensively, just kind of ho-hum, just in the 40s and 50s ranked in both. So really just an overrated team because their record looks so good, and they had a lot of wins early in the season. Haven't been quite as good in conference play, but they still had some pretty good wins in conference play that kind of surprised me as well. But I still don't think South Carolina is that good. But of course, they're going to be in the tournament. There's no question about that. They're probably going to be a 5 or 6 seed in the tournament. Whereas Mississippi State, they're kind of a bubble team. So I think that means that makes this game mean more to Mississippi State as well. A lot of the bracketologists, they have them pretty much in, but kind of in the 9 seed range. So they're going to want to get this win to really kind of make sure that they'll be able to get in. This would be their 20th win as well, which kind of matters a little bit. And of course, this is their home finale. Every team I'm on today, it's their home finale. So they get that little bump in the motivation. And Mississippi State actually plays, even though they play not very fast, 196th in tempo, that's still way faster than what South Carolina plays. So South Carolina, as slow as they play, they might get thrown off a little bit in this game. KenPom, yeah, I believe he has Mississippi State as somewhere around a 4-point favorite in this game. But South Carolina, look at what they're coming off of, man. They beat Florida 2 games ago at home, and then in their home finale, they played a big game against Tennessee. Tennessee was able to get road revenge, though, because South Carolina actually went into Tennessee and beat Tennessee on the road somehow. During a conference play, they went to Tennessee and they played a pretty tough game as well, though Tennessee was beating them for a lot of the second half by a pretty decent margin. South Carolina didn't go away, and they made a big comeback late and got to within 3 points with over a minute left. So they made it close. They were able to scare Tennessee in the end. That was a game, not a lot of scoring going on in that game, played in the 60s and 50s. So that was a big game for South Carolina, their home finale. Now they're coming off that, just kind of a near miss against Tennessee. Now they have to go on the road to face Mississippi State. Mississippi State, They're on a 3-game losing streak, but they lost 2 games on the road. They lost by 2 at home to Kentucky, one on the road, lost to Auburn. I mean, there's no shame in those losses. And then kind of a tough spot, kind of a sandwich spot almost. I don't know if was I on A&M in that one? I don't know, but they lost to Texas A&M, who's a team that is kind of fighting to remain relevant as well. But it looks like Texas A&M is likely to miss the tournament at this point, unfortunately for them. But that was still kind of a tough spot for Mississippi State. But now they're coming off that game, kind of an ugly loss. They've lost 3 games in a row after a nice 5-game win streak, although it was beating up on kind of the dregs of the SEC in that 5-game win streak. They're back home, though, and this is their home finale, and it's against one of the teams that's ranked pretty high, and the team that's sitting in second in the SEC somehow, South Carolina. Big game for Mississippi State here. And Mississippi State did already lose at South Carolina. They played a pretty decent game in that one, only losing by 6. Which was still, it's a slow-paced game. Neither of these teams are that fast. South Carolina, the slower team, of course. But if you look at Mississippi State at home in conference play this year, their only home losses this year, I believe, are to Alabama by 8 and to Kentucky by 2. I mean, that's pretty good, man. Those are their only 2 home losses in conference play to 2 of the best teams in the conference. And if you look at what the common denominator is between those 2 teams, Kentucky and Alabama, they both play really, really fast. They both have really good offenses, can score a ton, don't play good defense, but play really fast. And Mississippi State had some problems with them, but the other teams that Mississippi State has played at home this year, they've done fine. They beat Auburn at home and beat Tennessee at home. So the other top 2 teams in the SEC they were able to beat at home, Auburn and Tennessee. And actually, I believe they covered this number of 4.5 in both of those 2. They beat Tennessee by 5 and Auburn by 8 or something like that. So they were able to cover this number in both those games too. So Mississippi State is a much, much better team at home. So like I said, all the other like bad teams they played at home, they've beaten. The worst teams they played at home, they've beaten. And they're pretty much, I believe they've covered this margin in most of those too. They missed slightly against Arkansas, but covered they won by margin against all the bad teams that they played pretty much. And South Carolina is a step down from Tennessee, Auburn, Kentucky, and Alabama, man. And they went 2 for 4 in those games, and they only played Florida on the road. Did not play Florida at home this year, I believe, but lost that game on the road. But still, Mississippi State, much, much better at home. We'll be on Mississippi State minus 4.5. They're laying points, which also just looks suspicious, of course, because it's a team with a worse record that's not ranked, and they're laying points against a ranked team. Of course, the odds makers and the power ratings guys are telling you, they've been telling you all year, South Carolina is kind of an overrated commodity. So that's going to be the play in that one. And the spot is better for Mississippi State. And this line, looking at the market before I change gears to one of the other games here, the market's got South Carolina with 50% of the tickets evenly split 50-50, but 80% of the cash on Mississippi State. So the cash heavily on the Mississippi State side. So it looks like this is a somewhat of a pros versus Joes situation here, where the Joes look like they're perceiving value in getting a bunch of points with South Carolina here. Because, of course, it's the ranked team with the better record and a team that already beat Mississippi State once. So we're getting points. Yeah, that's so easy. Take the points. No, I don't think so. But the pros look like they're mostly coming in on the other side there, and they're telling you that no, that is not the way to look at this game. So Mississippi State will be the side in that one. Will be the play. Next one up is going to be on Vandy, plus 9.5. This one looks pretty ugly, man. Vanderbilt, they're hosting Florida. I like the spot for Vandy, as ugly as it is. I played Vandy once in a home game here. I believe you can, this is up from 9 to 9.5. It seems like it was at 10 at some points too. I don't know, but plus 9.5. I played Vandy once at home, and they were actually able to get that crazy win at the buzzer beater on that weird tip in against, who was that even against? Was that against Mississippi? No, it was against Texas A&M maybe. I don't know. It was against some team that was in a bad spot. I think it was against Texas A&M off of beating Tennessee or something like that. Some big letdown spot. So, but this is also a big letdown spot. So Vandy, as bad as they are, they've at least been a little bit better at home. And looking at the, they're a bad team for sure. They're an ugly team. But Florida, they're in the letdown spot, man. Florida, they slid out of the rankings, even though, yes, I think Florida is probably in like the 20s ranking wise. Like Ken Pom probably has them in the 20s, or he has them in 24th. So he has them as a team that should still be ranked, really. But Florida's coming off a couple of big games. They went to South Carolina, played a kind of a barn. Both of these games are barn burners. Florida was able to push the tempo big time against South Carolina, and Florida likes to play the much faster paced game than South Carolina does, and that game was way faster, but they still lost to South Carolina. Somehow, South Carolina was able to beat them at their own style, which is kind of crazy. And then Florida had their home finale against Alabama, and a huge win for Florida. They got to be feeling really high on themselves off of that win. That was a big win over one of the best teams in the SEC. That was a totally crazy high-scoring game. Florida scored over 100 points in that game. They got to be ripe for a letdown, man. Florida was out of the rankings going into that game, too, it looks like. I don't even know, but that's a huge win, man, over a 16th-ranked Alabama team who was actually – Alabama continues to be underrated, really, but Alabama doesn't play good defense. They just score a ton, play real fast, play good offense. Florida also plays fast and scores a lot and doesn't play very good defense. And they played really well in that game, put up 100 points in that game. This has to be a letdown, man. Home finale, they beat Alabama, one of the best teams in the SEC, very, very high-scoring affair, and just really kind of just took them out, beat them by almost 20, and scored over 100 in the game. You got to be in a huge letdown spot here, man, if you're Florida. I don't think you're going to be paying attention to Vandy. Florida, they're already looking ahead to the SEC tournament, and they're almost definitively in the NCAAA tournament at this point. I don't think there's any way they're going to miss at this point with that win over Alabama. They have wins at home over Alabama, Auburn, and Kentucky at this point. I don't think they're going to miss at all. Vandy, there's really not much left for Vandy here. I mean, I think all the teams play in the SEC tournament, but this is their home finale, and they have a pretty good Florida team coming into their house, and they're coming off an fairly ugly loss at Kentucky where they didn't play very well. They lost by double digits, by 16. This is going to be a big game for Vandy, man. It's their last game. I think they're going to go all out for this game, and that's not really what you want to be laying. You don't want to be laying a lot of points in a spot like this. When you're Florida, you're coming off your huge game, your home finale. You had this huge win. You might just be feeling really, really overconfident in yourselves and not really be focused on this game against one of the worst teams in the SEC, in Vandy, going into their house, and it's Vandy's home closer, man, and they have a pretty good team coming into their place. So I think they're going to be pumped up for this game. They're not going to want to end on a sour note like this. They're going to want to try to get this win if it's even possible. They've lost 5 of their last 6 games, 7 of the last 8. They've lost most games in conference play, really, going all the way back to the start of conference. Yeah, they're 3-14 in the conference, so very ugly. Better than Missouri, who's 0-17, but misery. But Vandy, I think this game doesn't really mean anything to Florida, but it means something to Vandy here to close the season on the right note. Florida laying a lot of points on the road here. Florida, of course, they play a much faster tempo. They're a very good offensive team, not a very good defensive team. They certainly lack on the defensive side of things. They're the 33rd fastest team in college, according to Ken Palm. Vanderbilt plays all the way down to 288, so much, much slower tempo. So that might kind of ugly the game up and kind of frustrate Florida a little bit too. Florida probably in a game where they aren't really going to have 100% focus in a game anyway. And if Vandy's able to get them into a slow-paced game, I think Florida might be kind of frustrated in this game and not be able to get out of there with a cover. You're asking them to cover a pretty big number on the road here, even though they are the better team. And if you look at Florida's road games, let's see here. I looked at this earlier. They're bad on the road, dude. Let me see. I should have just written this down because I went through this earlier. Let's see. They're 1-2. Let's see. 3-3. Yeah, I mean, I think they're below 50% on the road this year, but they've only covered this particular number. They've only covered once on the road all season, and it was against Missouri, who is who with Vandy is the other worst team in the SEC, but I think they're worse than Vandy. So other than that, Florida has not been able to cover a number like this on the road against anybody, although granted some of those games were against good teams for sure, but they were not able to cover it against Texas A&M. They lost outright against Texas A&M. They weren't able to cover it against Georgia. They weren't able to cover it against Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat them by almost 20 points. That's pretty crazy. And they were not able to cover it at Wake Forest. They lost by double digits at Wake Forest, too, in their only road out of conference game. So Florida has been a different team on the road, have not been very good on the road, have not been winning by margin on the road. The only time they did was against Missouri. Florida's got 94% of the tickets and 90% of the cash. So a heavily, heavily public Florida team here. And, of course, the public's going to want to have nothing to do with Vandy. They might not even want to get in on this game at all, but Florida is certainly the better team, but in this spot, I don't really think so. So we'll grab the very generous helping of points in Vandy's home finale there. I think Vandy is going to be pumped up for that game. Florida, they're coming off a much, much bigger game, one of their biggest wins of the season. Letdown mode, I don't like it for Florida at all. Moving on to the other game that is a home favorite against a ranked road underdog, and this is an unranked home favorite. That is Texas Tech, but of course Texas Tech has been in and out of the rankings. I like this one quite a bit, actually. Texas Tech, they've flipped from a 1-point underdog over to the favorite, so they're actually a 2-point favorite now. 56% of the cash on them and 52% of tickets, so it looks like maybe even they're slightly public. I don't know if I buy that they're slightly public. I think the public is probably going to look at this and think that there's going to be value on Baylor. I mean, they know the name Baylor. Baylor's the ranked team getting points. They are the better team, as the line is even telling you Baylor's the better team, but the line is telling you it's not by that much. Texas Tech has become the favorite here. I think you can find 1.5s out there still. You can lay 1.5 with Texas Tech here. Baylor, of course, Baylor, they're a very good offensive team, but they play pretty poor on defense. Ken Baum has Baylor actually winning this game by 1, I think. But even though it's, I don't know, if it's a game where it's just still kind of in the pick the winner range of numbers there, if you can lay 1.5, I still, with Texas Tech, I still think that that's fine. Baylor, not a good defensive team, very good offensive team, but defensively they really tend to lack. 75th in defense, according to Ken Baum, 5th in offense. But they also play a slow pace, which is crazy to have a very efficient offensive team, but play a very slow pace at 289. That's kind of weird to see as well, kind of rare. Texas Tech, Ken Baum has them just out of the top 25 at 28th. Not a bad team at all, Texas Tech. They are slightly better defensively than Baylor. I mean, Baylor's pretty bad defensively. Texas Tech, of course, not as good offensively. They're a little bit better defensively. They play almost a similar pace to Baylor, though, as well. So neither of these teams play very fast at all. They tend to like to kind of grind the game out a little bit more, but this is going to be on Texas Tech's home floor, so not really a pacing edge for Texas Tech there, or for either team, really. But I like the spot a lot better for Texas Tech. Baylor, I mean, something's up with this line, obviously. And Baylor's the 11th ranked team, and they're getting points, of course. So that just looks way too easy. But Baylor's coming off a couple of big games, dude. They got revenge against Kansas. They beat Kansas at home. And then they had what was a pretty big game against Texas, man, because Texas is leaving the Big 12 to go to the SEC. Texas is still considered to be like basically the big dog in the state of Texas. I mean, that is the University of Texas. And that was also revenge. Baylor had lost both road games at Texas and at Kansas. So now they're coming off getting revenge against both those teams at home. Texas was actually blowing Baylor out. Texas was winning by a lot. And then Texas, one of their starters fouled out with a lot of time left in the game. One of their other guys went down to injury, and Baylor was able to complete the comeback, make a huge comeback, and wind up getting out of there with a win and cover, which is crazy. That is a big win, even though Baylor's ranked higher than Texas. Like I said, Texas is still the University of Texas. It's still UT. They're still the big dog in Texas. It was revenge. It was the home finale for Baylor. Crowd was way into it. Big, big game for Baylor. Baylor did already beat Texas Tech at home this year as well. Now, to close the season, they're going out to Texas Tech, coming off those nice big revenge wins there, beating a team who you could still even argue is kind of the big brother in the state of Texas, in the University of Texas. Baylor able to beat them in that Texas rivalry. This is still a Texas rivalry, but this is now a spot where Texas Tech obviously has to consider themselves to be the little brother to Baylor. Baylor always has that name recognition. They're always one of the better teams in college basketball. They're typically better than Texas, really, at this point, even though I did say Texas is still kind of considered to be the big brother. Baylor is always like one of the best teams in Texas. Now you got Texas Tech. Texas Tech's been a little bit lackluster as of late, but they're still trying to play to get into the tournament as well. Baylor, of course, they're absolutely going to be in the tournament. Baylor is almost absolutely locked into the 3 in the Big 12 tournament as well. But the difference between 3, 4, wherever they wind up in the tournament, I don't think that matters that much. Seeding in these big neutral site tournaments doesn't really matter that much. You still know you're going to play in the tournament, and you're going to play against some good teams and do what you can do. Texas Tech, I like the fact that they've won their last 2 games, though. They were both on the road against bad teams, the 2 worst teams in the conference, West Virginia and Oklahoma State. But still, it's not that easy to go out on the road and beat any of these teams, really. And they beat them both, which I think is just going to be momentum coming into this game. And now this is going to be their home finale. They have Baylor, a team that already beat them at Baylor, coming into their house for their home finale. I like Texas Tech, man. I'm going to lay the small number with Texas Tech here. It looks way too easy to take the other side, but this is a game that means a lot more to Texas Tech. There's more at stake for them, as they are questionable to make the tournament, I would say, even though I think it's pretty likely they'll still get in. But Baylor obviously is almost completely like safe and kind of like locked into where they're going to be in the tournament. They're going to be one of the higher seeds in the tournament yet again. There's not much they can gain by winning this game, and they're coming off a couple of their bigger wins of the season, Kansas being maybe one of the biggest. And then Texas Tech, yeah, they're coming off just a couple of momentum starters. You will also see that Texas Tech just lost at home to Texas. So people might look at that and think, well, if Texas Tech loses at home to Texas and Baylor was just able to win, of course, at home against Texas, then what are we doing here? Of course, this is so easy. You're getting points with Baylor. Not so easy, my friends. We'll take Texas Tech in this one. And then to close it out, we are going to do something that seems maybe the most dangerous one that we have here. That's going to be to take the points with Providence. This game's gone down. UConn is the team that we're fading here. It looks like it opened 12. I don't know when it was 12, but it's gone down to 9.5 now. I think there were still 10s out there. I was able to get 10 on Providence. This line looks like it continues to go down. Yeah, I think you can find 10s. It looks like it's going down further, though. 9.5 looks like what the majority of the numbers are. Ken Bum doesn't have this out of line from where he actually has UConn winning this game by less than 10, which is crazy. So this line way up there in UConn. Of course, UConn's considered to be one of the best teams in the country. A lot of people think they are the best. UConn's the public team, 67% of tickets, 54% of the cash over on the other side on the Providence side. So this looks like it's kind of a pros versus Joes situation now, too. And we're getting a lot of points with Providence at home. And I like this one, man. If you look at UConn, they have not covered a number like this on the road. They have not won by double digits on the road. I think outside of maybe one game all year, I don't think they've done it. I think the only time they did it was against St. John's on the road. I don't know if we're just looking at conference play or not. Yeah, even if you're looking at non-conference, the only road game they had non-conference was Kansas, which they lost. So on the road, they have not been as good. I mean, that I feel like I'm saying that with everything. That is the case with all these teams that actually. Sorry, they've done it 3 times, but the other ones are Georgetown and DePaul. So sorry, yeah. So I was going to say you could throw those 2 games out, man. I mean, Georgetown, DePaul, they don't even belong in the Big East really at this point. Like they just are complete doormats. So if you exclude the Georgetown and DePaul games, which are just like automatic wins, basically, UConn has only covered this number one other time on the road at St. John's. They lost on the road at Seton Hall. They only beat Villanova by 1 on the road, beat Butler by 7, Xavier by 5. So some of these teams have been able to play pretty well against them, and they're just coming off a big win over Marquette to season sweep them, but it was without Tyler Kolek. UConn had a bigger lead in that game, but I was on Marquette, unfortunately, and it wound up being a 7-point win. Marquette actually got to within 5.5 near the end there, so it was that game, and then UConn, of course, lost to Creighton pretty badly on a game I was also on, and I won on Creighton there, but UConn has not been the same team on the road, not covering big numbers like this, not winning by double digits on the road very often. UConn coming off the season sweep of Marquette, big win there. Now this is their 2nd straight road game. They already finished. They've already more than clinched the Big East at this point, regular season. They had clinched it going into the prior game, clinched it at home with a blowout win over Seton Hall. There's nothing left for them to prove, man. They already beat Providence at home. They're going to Providence, and Providence has everything to play for in this game, man. Their tournament hopes are on the line, really. If they're on the bubble, if they want to get into the tournament, they got to win this game. So you're getting a team in their home closer, too, against one of the best teams in the country. They're obviously going to have all the motivation in the world here. Home closer against UConn, needing a huge win to get into the tournament. I don't expect them to win this game, but I like them to cover this game, man. UConn, like I said, has not had a good record this year, as far as covering big numbers is concerned. They haven't been the team to do that. UConn is a defensive, slow-paced team, and even though they're very balanced, they're actually good, actually better offensively than defensively, which is crazy. They're just really good on both sides of the ball, but they're one of the slower teams in the country at 334th. They play very slow, so that's not a good recipe for covering on the road either. Providence is also a pretty good defensive team, actually. They have trouble scoring, but their defense is actually pretty good as well. So you got 2 good defenses. Providence kind of middle of the pack tempo-wise. That kind of sets up for a home cover of a big number as well. You have 2 teams that don't really push the pace. The points are probably going to be harder to come by in this game. I like Providence. Big game for them. And, of course, they've been without Bryce Hopkins for a long time now, which is unfortunate, but they're used to playing without him at this point, without their star. They've been able to put up some decent performances at home without him. They were able to beat Creighton at home without him, so they did do that. So that's not bad. They also won at home against Marquette by a lot earlier this year, but that was with Hopkins. So that's going to do it. I'll make another video just to talk about NBA, NHL real quick. I only have 2 plays over there, but that's college basketball for today, man. Final college basketball Saturday. Let's get it done. Can I recap this really quick? Yeah, I think I can. So Kansas State +4, Villanova +1.5, Mississippi State -4.5, Vanderbilt +9.5, Texas Tech -1.5, and Providence +10. Let's get it done, man. Let's have a winning Saturday. Peace.